Welcome back to the Northstar Politics Show, and if you're like me, you're probably a bit too political. For example, I think that run clubs are a response to the decline of community and third spaces in London. But if running is not your thing, well, a new club is now on the rise, Scream Clubs. Yes, Londoners are meeting up in parks and screaming together, which I'm sure indicates we're doing just fine. Screams for Joy, though, has also taken place across the world as well, with the Gazan ceasefire allowing Israeli hostages to return home and Palestinian hostages to return, well, back to rubble. And whilst Trump takes credit, let's not forget he has been in the pocket of Israel for a very long time. I mean, remember the Epstein files we never saw? And speaking of Epstein, remember Peter Mandelson, British politician and Epstein's lover? Well, his protege, Morgan McSweeney, who is Keir Starmer's chief of staff, is in the news for dodgy donations. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But thank God, because we have an alternative. Your party has just officially launched for the third time. Let's get into it.
Welcome back.
Damn. First week done. Can you believe it?
I cannot believe it. Episode 2. I didn't think we'd make it to episode 1, and here we are.
No, you know what? I'm actually going to give you a hard question straight off the bat.
Whoa. I was second week of podcasting and we're getting grilled.
Just let me land.
Land.
Okay. So, 1,000 followers on Instagram.
Yep.
3,000 followers on TikTok. I think 250k views on clips as well.
Appreciate it.
Noah, can you actually go to Tesco's anymore without getting recognised?
You know what it is, yeah. I'd been a backseat driver to your fame, your abundant fame.
Once upon a time.
And I was getting the messages early doors when you were getting recognised in the streets and these sorts of things. And it's just been strange because, as you know, I very much don't really like to be out there in public. One day we'll get into the backstory of how this podcast came to pass.
Of course.
But a big part has been Sean trying to get me in front of camera for a couple of years now. So it's been a strange week for me.
And you know what? The algorithms, they love your bobblehead.
They're loving it.
They really do.
They're loving it. Just love it. Just the way it just feels like that camera is shaped like the phone screen. They love it. Bro, I was running in Stratford on, when would it have been? I mean, let me not even say when I do my running schedule.
So people don't follow along.
Yeah, people don't follow along.
Okay, sure.
They couldn't keep up. But I was running in Stratford on Saturday, and Stratford's an area near where I grew up, so I'm used to thinking, I see people there and maybe I don't remember them, I don't know where I know them from, but I'm running down the canal path and a guy's coming towards me on a bike. Shout out you. And I'm looking at him, he's looking at me, I'm thinking, where do I know this guy from? Because he's looking at me like he knows me.
Yep.
He gets even closer. I'm half screwing because I'm forgetting that I'm a podcaster now. He's gone, yes, Noah. I've gone, yeah, what are you telling me, G? He said, no, I know you from the podcast. I'm just going, what?
And then you switch back into your podcast voice. Oh, hello, nice to meet you. Really nice to meet you.
Immediately, podcast voice on. I say, oh, welcome back to Northstar Politics. But it's been beautiful, the response we've had. People that we've known from childhood reaching out again.
Yeah,
the support's been lovely.
And I think just on a very serious note, as if we're not serious all the time, we have the sincerest intentions with this podcast, and we hope it does grow, inspire conversation, and we want to build a community as well. So please like, subscribe, follow along, all of that type of stuff. It's going to be on Apple and Spotify soon if Tariq, our producer, actually reads his WhatsApps for once in his life. But yeah, excited.
No, honestly, like we've mentioned it a bit before, and at some point we'll get out our full manifesto thesis on what we want to do with Northstar.
Yep.
But a big part of it is creating that like community lifestyle of politics, where politics isn't something that just happens on screen or in Westminster. It's something that we can all engage in an enjoyable way. So it's been brilliant to see people getting involved in the discourse, debating in the comments, reaching out to us.
For sure.
And I've been getting absolutely cooked because immediately when the podcast has come out, like half of my boys have just messaged me saying, so what voice is that? Like, what voice
As
is
in,
that?
we share the same friendship group, so everyone was asking me the same thing.
Bro, it's but the person who wasn't asking me about where did you get that voice from is the woman who taught me to code switch.
Okay.
My mother.
Come on.
Yeah, she was
Wonderful lady, may I add.
She was watching on Proud. But I think it was funny to see because people might not know, but I have a background when I was younger in like world level debating. So I think there is some level of muscle memory when cameras go on, you're in a public space, and you just get into that articulation.
Well, I think over time as well, like as someone who's actually been on camera and like, you know, has done this for like 2-3 years now, you are able to find that equilibrium where you can actually get your personality out a bit more, but then also sound like who you are. But at the same time as well, I think being on a podcast, you are sort of, I feel like, especially from coming from our backgrounds, because again, working class, state school communities, you do have that sort of level that you need to try and hit of trying to actually sound articulate. And sometimes I do think if I sound a bit more posh, I do actually become a bit more eloquent, to be honest.
No, precisely. And I think, obviously I'm raised in a Caribbean family. It's quite a Caribbean thing as well, especially quite a Commonwealth thing. I'd maybe even extend it to.
They probably don't even know I'm from a Caribbean family as well, to be honest. So let me just say right now, Trini to the bone.
Okay.
Yeah. Even why do you think the Northstar colours
There we go.
are red, white, and black?
Yeah, and myself, Dominican.
Where's that again?
Come on, this guy, man. But native East Londoner. But it's funny because I was thinking about the code switching thing, and one thing my mum always rejected was the idea that it's a posh thing to do. No, articulating yourself is just an important thing to do for anyone to get your ideas out. Someone we look up to both. Autobiography on the Table, Malcolm X, had a reflective time in prison where he managed to understand the power of words and the power of communication. And speaking of your heritage, I'll never forget when I first came to your house and I met your grandma, may she rest in peace, and you walk in and this sort of Indian-looking lady's just there, and I say, good afternoon, auntie. She goes, what?
What? Who you is, boy? Who you is, boy?
And then when you spoke to her, Sean just has to put on the most thick Trini accent to have that kind of lucid discussion with his grandma. So code switching is it was something maybe we'll delve down into more later, but it's not necessarily what might meet the eye.
No, for sure.
Also, speaking of the impact we've had this week, we've got on a couple of radars. Obviously, we had a little self-help clinic, or not a self-help clinic, a clinic for Gary's economics. And in fact, Gary was lurking in the story views on my story. Now, I don't even have that many followers. Follow my Instagram.
And that's the guy you look up to as well, so you must be kind of...
Speaking of my shout out for myself, follow my Instagram, Noah East 9. But yeah, we've got so much love for Gary. We're giving a little bit of critique, and he was there. He parked the SUV across the driveway from my house, and he said, I'm watching you. So like, Gary, we appreciate that. In fact, Gary, just so you know that we're on your team, we had some bozo reach out to us who claims, well, he actually is. He was your boss at Citibank, saying that he wants to come on the podcast. Honestly, thirsty breader. This is not what we're about. Starving Marvin, yeah. Keep your thoughts to yourself. We're Team Gary.
But I also think like it's quite interesting putting out these clips because people actually get so animated when it's like, guys, come on, we're just trying to bring some conversation to the place. Precisely. Everyone just relax. Yeah. You know, for once we actually want to have a nuanced discussion around these obviously very topical things. And so, yeah, it's always interesting to see how animated people get in the comments.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about the Northstar ideology around what we're trying to build, is that ability to have well-intentioned conversations where you can disagree, and that's totally fine.
It's fine.
So, like I said, there's never really any malice in what we're saying. As long as we understand someone else or our co-locutor, whoever we might be talking about, is well-intentioned themselves.
Just to mention on that point as well, we're always right and you're always wrong if you disagree, by the way.
Precisely. I always say a good way to know you're wrong, do you disagree with me? But someone who is, at the moment, in our rankings, we're working out rankings of who our top supporters are. And there's one woman, I got to shout out again.
Go ahead.
My mum. Because my mum, she just come back from Cuba and she's had a spiritual awakening. She is in the comments, spitting the most mystical mythology, that mystical math.
Share them with the viewers.
That stuff we love. So my mum is in the comments, under a pseudonym. Some of the quotes she came out with is, she just quoted randomly, "Is the enemy of my enemy my friend?" Okay, auntie.
Okay. What else you got?
She came again with, "In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king." You know about that one. And then the last one, which she actually commented this 3 times on one post. She wanted this one to land. "In the time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act." So everyone, that's the bar you need to meet when you're commenting.
She's reading these books.
She come on, stay woke.
Do you know what my mum said?
What?
Oh gosh, boy, what that podcasting you're doing there is, boy.
See, there's levels to it, but as long as you're supporting, we're loving it. But if anyone can, next week, we're going to be looking for some top comments. People coming with that real mystical math, and you maybe get a shout out next time. But aside from all the jokes, you're up to some serious stuff this weekend.
Yes, I was. So I actually went to the Palestine march, the march after the ceasefire, to actually just get an understanding of why people are still marching. Obviously, we have our own opinions, but it's always really good to understand from the protesters themselves, particularly as well, given that the discourse around it is it's quite condescending, actually.
Okay.
You know, actually, the fact that you have politicians from both sides, so Labour and Conservative, I believe Shabana Mahmood, Kemi Badenoch today basically saying practically the same things around how, them marching, shouldn't it be perhaps a celebration or something like that, because they have the very superficial view that all of this is over now because there is a ceasefire. So that was pretty interesting.
That makes sense. And I think we're going to get into it in the state of play, the real meat and 2 veg of the ceasefire agreement and what the implications are. But as someone who was there on the protest, on the march on Saturday, what was the vibe? What was the feeling on the ground?
It's always amazing to be part of a protest because you really do get quite easily swept in the sort of charismatic community that's there. Also, actually seeing the kind of wide spectrum of all the different people who attend. I think the media headlines want you to believe it's people who look like me or a bunch of probably silly, angry Muslims. Or actually, most people there were actually English, white people, a lot of old people as well. And so it's really nice to be part of an environment where people are so inclusive, understanding. Because I feel like on the day-to-day in London, things are quite alienating. You know, things are very individualistic, perhaps.
Yeah.
But when this protest happens, people are united across a common cause and actually have, you know, it gives them in that environment the ability to reach out to each other and actually just have conversations with a lot of people. So I got into great conversations with people, and we've started posting some clips on our social media as well.
Okay, lovely stuff. And as I say, I think it's really important that people don't lose sight of what they might have built, that community energy they might have built over these past few years protesting quite a specific issue, and carry that forth, both in terms of further pursuing the Palestine issue, but also in other areas. But with that said, we're going to get into the state of play, where we'll be discussing the ceasefire issue. We'll be discussing a recent book about Keir Starmer, and we'll also be discussing the Your Party launch. So let's get into the state of play. So welcome to the State of Play, the part of the show where we're going to discuss the more mainstream topics, things that you might have seen in the news cycle already, and what really are on the main roads. So obviously the most important topic for us to discuss this week is the Gaza ceasefire deal that's been agreed, led by the United States, Israel, and Hamas representing the citizens of Gaza. And what I'll do is I'll give a little bit of explain about what's been agreed, the timelines. We'll talk about the implications, and we'll also talk about a few of our concerns and hopes for what might come from this. So President Donald Trump and Netanyahu agreed the deal in Washington. It was then put to the leaders of Hamas under a timeline to consent to this deal or not. And what they've consented to is only the first stage of this plan, but there are 3 stages that will go into effect if negotiations go well. So the first stage, which is now underway, will last 6 weeks, and it is the release of hostages and the withdrawal of troops from certain sections of the Gaza Strip. Going beyond that, there will be a permanent end to the fighting and a complete withdrawal of Israeli troops from the Gaza Strip. The third stage, which is a bit more obscure and contentious, is an entire rebuilding of the Gaza Strip, which, weirdly enough, will be overseen by a committee of which Tony Blair will be a part. In the intermediate period, where the agreement has been made up until today, there have been multiple Gazans killed by Israeli troops in the Gaza Strip, including 6 on the day of filming. So this is by no means perfect. A ceasefire also is not permanent. A ceasefire doesn't contain within it an Israeli consent to Palestinian sovereignty, respect for boundaries, nor does Hamas agree to this being a permanent state of affairs. So there's a lot up in the air, but we can be grateful at this point in time that there is some level of progress in terms of an end to the killing. A few interesting points I want to draw out for discussion. One, the fact that this war started, or this genocide in fact started, because Israel, the Likud party, Bibi Netanyahu, were not supporting or not consenting to the control that Hamas had over the Gaza Strip as a representation for the Gazan people. Hamas were framed as terrorists, Hamas were framed as illegitimate leaders, Hamas were framed as people that would not be negotiated with. The fact that this deal has been signed between Israel, the state of Israel, and Hamas shows a legitimacy to Hamas rulership there and puts into question the entire motivations that, although we're already skeptical of, have underpinned this invasion, this genocide. The second thing I'd want to get your thoughts on is the feasibility of this being maintained. I want to bring people's attention to the state of Israeli politics. Within politics, sometimes we talk about hawkish and dovish actors within politics. So hawkish are those that are more inclined for warfare. Dovish are those that are more inclined for peacemaking. Within the Israeli government, surprising to many people as it might be, Netanyahu is quite moderate. There are significant actors such as Bezalel Smotrich or Itamar Ben-Gvir, ministers within his government, who are far more to the right, far more hawkish than him, who will seize on this opportunity and the, although limited, concessions that have been made in terms of putting an end to the ceasefire and respecting some level of Palestinian territory as an opportunity to depose him and then reignite. The second thing I want to get your thoughts on, and we'll get into this further, is how trusting we are of this. Because as we know, and as most people at this point be aware of, this problem, this contention, this conflict didn't start on October 7th. And we've seen a history flowing all the way back to the 30s and the Nakba of Israel reneging on agreements they have made. So the first thing I want to get your thoughts on is initial reactions to the ceasefire being called.
Well, look, I think the end to violence anywhere is objectively always a good thing. The fact that, you know, we don't have to sit by idly on our phones and watch, or supposedly we won't have to watch again the absolute sort of bombardment, destruction and erasure of Palestinian identity in the Gaza Strip. I'm just personally happy at least that the people living there actually get some sort of relief. And also, of course, you know, I think if we want to actually just bring it all into perspective, right? 40 Israeli hostages are going back home. 2,000 Palestinian hostages are going back to rubble, right? And so the false equivalence, the asymmetrical relationship of all of this is still heartbreaking, and it's still galvanizing people to go on the streets. And it's why I was also there in protest on Saturday. And it feels hopeless, and it does feel very pessimistic. And that's why it's important, at the very least, right, when we ask about this question, what can we do? At least in our capacity, we're trying to push this conversation to actually open it up to people as well. So those are my initial thoughts. I can definitely talk a bit more about what I saw on the march and how trusting I am of this in general. But first of all, yeah, pleasant about some sort of relief. But then at the same time, yeah, definitely quite worried.
I would say one of the reasons I'm skeptical of this progressing into a fully fledged peace and solution is because inherent in the Israeli mission is this ethno-colonial expansion. In the Likud, with the leading party, Likud Party manifesto, they have the purpose, from the river to the sea, there will be only Israeli sovereignty. So very much within the founding fathers of Zionism, within their mission statement, is this ethno-colonial expansion. And a lot of times what we've seen when there's been ceasefires or ends to conflicts in the 70s and the 40s is that they take this as merely a stepping stone or a speed bump in overarching conquest. And I worry about what we've seen from Western states, the United States, European states, how much consent or slack has been given to Israel, that they won't take this as a sign that 3 years from now, we go again.
No, 100%. And I think that everything that we've seen in terms of progression so far has been very nominal in its value, right? Okay, cool. Britain, they recognize a Palestinian state. So what? What has that actually done? Of course, I'm happy that that happened, but realistically, from a diplomatic perspective, sure, it gives them street cred. It gives the Labour government some sort of bypass for the next election, but ultimately it hasn't led to any material difference in Palestinian lives. And even when we talk about the coverage of this, for the longest while, no journalists were allowed in Gaza. Is that going to happen now? Can anyone go back to Gaza? Can I go visit Gaza? Like, there's so many questions that need to be answered, but also I'm very unsure about the level of actual transparency we're going to get in this conversation. And also, I just think that in all of this, time and time again, right, Palestinians and their ideas and their decision making is not being centered on this. We're outsourcing it to some sort of imperial leader, Tony Blair, right, architect of the Iraq War. And lest we forget, what about West Bank settlements, right? Louis Theroux did the whole documentary this year about it, which actually brought some light to it. And since then, what sanctions? Has that happened?
I think there's something interesting you bring up there when you talk about the recognition of Palestine as a state. And if you allow me to get a little bit esoteric into the international relations...
Please, I invite you to get esoteric.
Into the international relations of it, is that the problem for global coordination, and this is a long-studied theory within international relations, is that in reality, if we grant that every country has sovereignty, by which we mean they have self-determination over their own land territory, then when they come to interact with one another, they actually are in what Hobbes would describe as what we'd formally understand a state of anarchy, where there is no power above them because they have sovereignty themselves. So what that means and especially for modern theorists, even liberal theorists of international relations, that the only way we can start to exert some control over what is acceptable within the global realm is through the development of norms. And as we'll see within the UK society or UK politics, norms are only powerful insofar as they are respected. Norms are only powerful insofar as they are respected. And marginal infringement upon the norm leads to marginal weakening of that norm. And my big concern is that what we've seen here, if the ceasefire goes ahead, and even if we progress to a state of sort of intermediary peace, as we'd hope, is that a new globally understood norm has been cemented. If Israel is not held to account, if the actors who have aided Israel are not held to account, then a new globally understood norm has been cemented. And what I mean by that is this, is up until this genocide, there's obviously been countless cases around the world of humanitarian abuses, but they have been quite rightly critiqued a lot of times by the United States, by global leaders. In this instance, however, there has been clear weaponization of famine, clear suspension of humanitarian aids, ethno-colonial expansion, murder of innocents. And the fact that we've arrived at a ceasefire doesn't undo those ills. And if we progress from the ceasefire into a world where Israel is a normalized state and the actors who have done this, Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, Smotrich, are allowed to continue within the political realm, then that has put in place a new norm, which is incredibly concerning.
Precisely. And it also comes back to Hannah Arendt's theory of like the banality of evil, right? And how actually evil and the ability to commit genocide and all these things isn't some sort of faraway concept of the boogeyman, the supervillain, but evil is in like the thoughtless actions of the ordinary and the very nature of our own politicians as well, right? So when we talk, I feel like on this conversation, it's very hard to imagine how we can actually have any sort of impact in the sort of political realm. But at home, our politicians, in their rhetoric of like normalizing, as you say, right, not being willing to actually hold these politicians to account, not being willing to, you know, actually enforce ICC warrants for arrest for Netanyahu and his cronies, is that we're getting to a very dangerous place where all of this, like you said, is normalized, and that's because evil has become very banal.
And you talk about things that become ordinary and holding politicians back home to account, like what can we do, the little people. And that was one of the comments I made last week when I spoke about the relationship between the who does the accounting and who's held accountable. A lot of people were drawn to that. And in this instant, I think because of how publicly understood the Palestine conflict is, and because of how many resources have been expended by different institutions, a lot of whom will list in the description below to show who is culpable, there is an opportunity here for people to become politically animated on a ground level, whereby we can find out, it is publicly understood which members of the government, members of the leading party in Britain have taken money from Labour Friends of Israel. And the best way to animate your consciousness about that is think, would I want to be represented or have leading my country someone in the 80s and 90s who was taking funds from Labour Friends of South Africa during an apartheid state? No, of course not. And to fight against the norm that's being set, that we are ruled by people who are arm in arm with genocide committers and culpable for aiding and abetting a genocide, we need to push against that by holding those to account.
And that's the thing, people think it's impossible. So one of the big debates that you get into with like the liberals who might still, you know, support Labour, but still sort of say or claim that they're anti what's going on, is that, oh, but this is just politics and they just kind of have to do this. Like this idea that actually sort of, you know, taking a principled stance like the countries of Spain or Norway, right? Britain being able to do that is like a faraway concept or fantasy because we have to be intimately tied with the US on global politics. And
we get back to where we are on our discussion of the first principles of politics. The polis, people moving in concert. The politics you see on TV is no more is only a representation of the politics that we create on the ground level. And if we as a population are apathetic and totally uninclined to do anything, then you will have people that are totally devoid of ideology running the show.
Precisely.
I think you look at things that are being normalized. I don't know if you know, but Maccabi Tel Aviv, an Israeli football team, is about to go and play a Europa League game in Aston Villa in Birmingham. Why is an Israeli team playing in a European competition first and foremost? Second of all, why are we allowing a team that is part of a state that's committing genocide to march around Europe playing football games as if nothing else is going on?
Lest we not forget that Eurovision as well.
Yeah, I mean, Eurovision is, but all of these are tools of soft power, tools of normalization,
Precisely.
normalizing a state as if it were not committing a genocide. The playbook's set out by various different countries. And on the ground level, we can protest this. We can not support companies that are involved in this. We can isolate Israel as a state, economically and socially. But as I say, the politics you see on TV, the politics at a high level is only a representation of the politics you endorse or allow to happen on a personal level.
And the historical narrative is going to change, right? Once upon a time, Mandela was literally considered a terrorist by the likes of Thatcher and even, I think, Theresa May, right?
Yeah.
There's that famous video where she couldn't sort of commit to the idea of her saying that she didn't think Mandela was, or didn't say Mandela was a terrorist back in the day. And so it's only a matter of time, 20 years, 10 years, maybe even 30 years down the line, where people will look back on us in shame because we didn't speak out against it. Our countries didn't stand up for what, again, coming back to this hypocrisy of the liberal kind of global order. Whatever happened to human rights? Whatever happened to democracy and freedoms? I guess it only applies to us who live in the West. And
Precisely.
Not,
And that sort of marginal dehumanization was evidenced today when I walk into my local supermarket and you see every front page littered with the Israeli hostages are home. And I think that just shows, even though it's not explicated clearly, the implication is that these are the higher humans. These are the hostages who are really suffering because they are more human. They're more like us. They're more of that imagined Eurocentric nature. And we'll wrap up here, but I think for us, we're obviously going to be following closely how this develops. But as we say, because of the deceit that Israel has shown for going on 100 years now, this ceasefire is something that we really, really wish takes hold and progresses into a full, successful solution of peace. But we watch with hopeful hearts, but bated breath, because we understand and we've seen time and time again how Israel maneuvers. Yeah. The second topic we're going to move on to is a look at the Your Party launch. I think this is something that is obviously intimately linked to the Palestine
which
issue.
one, sorry?
The Your Party launch. You maybe heard of it. Is come and gone and come and gone. But
The third.
The third. Your Party, the third.
The trilogy.
The trilogy, very much so. All good things come in threes, and hopefully this will be a good thing long term. But at the moment, it has become sort of the laughing stock of politics in the UK. So Your Party. During this summer, Zara Sultana, formerly of Labour, having left the party, launched her new party endeavour with Jeremy Corbyn. The reason we're referring to it as Your Party is because within this political ideology, they had committed to the party being named at a later date by its members. In the intermediary period since then, there's been a lot of problems with the party. Zara Sultana posting certain links which have been alleged to not be totally tied to the party's central structure, but to her own support pages. Jeremy Corbyn then coming out and disavowing that. Zara Sultana coming back and saying that she's been sort of bullied within a boys' club. And as the dust settled, last week we had Your Party sort of formally having a launch where arm in arm, Zara Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn were there to talk about the next steps, to say that they put differences aside and we're moving from there. A lot has happened. We've been following it closely. We were so excited when we saw the initial launch of Your Party, as so many were. About 700,000 people signed up to the newsletter, and initially, like within 2 hours, tens of thousands of people signed up to be members. You, as someone who I know was incredibly hopeful about the prospects of this party endeavour. At this point, what's your appraisal?
Yeah, look, so I think it's obviously an incredible shame what's happened, and I think it really will have deep ramifications for the party itself. I do want to give a mini hot take though,
Okay.
and I don't think we should lose hope just yet. And the reason I don't think we should lose hope just yet is because last week on the podcast I said that this movement on the left, so to speak, is not a zero-sum game, and I actually think there is space for coalition and coalition building between Your Party and the Greens. And if it is the case that, sure, the Greens sweep up in some certain areas of the country, I still think Corbyn's name is definitely big enough to actually attract a lot of different names across the country in different parts as well. And so I do see a positive future if they have some sort of agreement, electorally that is. But of course, internally, I think it's quite embarrassing, to be honest, and it's made like as you said, us a laughing stock. Yeah,
and I think honestly, the loss of momentum is frightening to see. Pardon the pun, But the fact that now, they didn't disclose their membership numbers at the time, we can assume because they weren't particularly noteworthy. And even coming out of this launch on Friday, very little has been written about them. The speeches themselves given by Zara and Jeremy Corbyn were lovely and, as you'd imagine, very inspirational. But the biggest thing I've seen is them being critiqued, especially Zara Sultana, being critiqued for trying to delineate themselves from the Green Party, with the standout piece of sort of policy ideology being that they want to leave NATO. And it's kind of like...
sorry, not to cut you off, but there was also the idea that they actually won't have any diplomatic relations at all with Israel.
Precisely. And I just sort of think the fact that this hasn't captured the news cycle, the fact that this hasn't been taken on within like leftist circles or something that's an important building block for your party to develop, kind of shows how much groundwork they now need to rebuild. And I think, my sort of take on it is, I was super impressed by the underlying spirit of your party. There was a brilliant interview with James Schneider, who we know well enough, and was formerly of the Corbyn Year Labour Party, and has been involved in different capacities with your party, where he spoke about pushing the political imagination, as we always talk about, to understand politics as more of a lifestyle, not something that people don't partake in for 4 years and then go to the polling booth and do, but to develop from the ground up an associational way of life through people restoring club atmospheres, social gathering atmospheres, political communitarian atmospheres, such that the top of the party just becomes the outcome of that rather than top down. And I think, ironically, your party has fallen foul to the type of politics they came to solve. People have been sort of physically petrified by the stasis or the stagnation of the leadership. The disjointed way of the leadership has totally undermined any level of community building at the ground level. And I think the leaders have concerned themselves with how to divide a pie without realizing it's kind of rotting in their hands.
No, for sure. I also think there is in a sense that they are quite out of touch. And let me explain what I mean. So myself and you, and we'll talk about this in depth at some point, is that Northstar is not just some sort of talking heads on camera, but we were really in these streets trying to campaign and do this coalition building for the last 2 years in the pro-independent movements, etc. And so we've worked directly with a lot of figures independently before all this Your Party stuff, and have built connections through that. That's how we know James Schneider. And one of the things that we've felt is such an obstacle is actually how insular they all are. Now, you'd obviously expect them to be quite open to new ideas, new people, etc. But the risk appetite to be politically ambitious is actually quite underwhelming. And so,
do you think a big part of that is what happened with the Corbyn years in Labour? They're kind of scarred.
No, for sure, it definitely is. And I'm not trying to play like this kind of blame game, perhaps, but I do think, look, when we were at Oxford, who was banging down our college doors 24/7, trying to get us to be part of them? JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, the top firms, right? Politically, who actually had presence? The Labour Party, Conservatives, Lib Dems, etc., right? People put in these top organisations put in so much investment into young talent and young pipelines, to the point where even Reform's doing it. Who has the youngest councillors in the UK right now? The Reform Party, right? They're bringing young people into their movement to actually galvanise some sort of fire and some sort of momentum. Again, pardon the pun.
Bro, when I was a campaign manager for one of the independent, we can say,
we can say.
When I was campaign manager for Tasnim Akunji when he was running for Parliament, we would frequently head to GB News for him to debate Nigel Farage. And the producers in the back, while we're sat behind the scenes, would sort of say to me like, "Oh, so like, well, you're younger," and they were literally trying to like tap me up to get involved with GB News, even though I'm clearly here like a pro-palette. But they're just so obsessed with promoting talent because they understand that's how movements get.
But that's
going.
what I mean, and that this movement here it lacks that so much, and it's frustrating because we've seen it, right? And not even to sort of expose private conversations, but there's other young people part of these movements that we spoke to that have big social media followings, and they've said the same thing. So
and when I say scarred by the Corbyn years, a lot of you will know, but some of you might not know, that during the time when Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, there were factions within the Labour Party, further to the right of the Labour Party, who were leveraging certain cancel-worthy topics to seize power. So this is like levying the ideas of anti-Semitism against a lot of the left wing of the Labour Party to essentially oust them. And we'll talk about that in a sec when we talk about Morgan McSweeney and Labour Together, which is one of the big think tanks who really essentially ran a coup within the Labour Party to then bring about this beautiful mess we have with Keir Starmer running it. The final thing I want to say on this topic is from the start, there's a concern I've had with your party. So, you know, me and Sean, just like any normal people, will sit around discussing like theoretical politics.
So normal.
Like the nightmare blunt rotation people we are. And early this year, towards the start of the year, I developed the theory that by the time of the next election cycle, people are only going to vote for ideologues. And what do I mean by this? So an ideologue is someone who is devoted to a particular idea, devoted to a particular ideology. And the reason why I think people are only going to vote for clear ideologues is because of voter fatigue. Voters have lived within a duopoly where there's really only two parties to choose from, Labour or Conservative. And what they've seen, because a lot of this top brass of the political elite are in the pocket of corporate interests, is them vote for change each election, and the elected party, the incumbent, then go against their word, go against their mandate to end up appeasing their corporate interests. So what they've realised is that when the wind changes, you will change their view. You know, one of the clips that did very well last week was me talking about the Jekyll and Hyde generation of Labour. And that's precisely what underpins it. People are realising that there's actually no value in my vote because I'm voting for a bunch of ideas that will never happen because people just flip-flop with the wind. So then what starts to happen? People say, okay, well, maybe I'll look at this character who, even if they're not perfect, at least I know that I'll get what I'm voting for. There's Nigel Farage. There's Jeremy Corbyn. When Brexit wasn't popular, Nigel Farage was screaming Brexit. When it was popular, he was screaming Brexit. When it's not popular again, he'll be screaming Brexit. There's the underpinning of him laughing in the European Parliament. You all laughed at me, but you're not laughing now. Mm-hmm. Same with Jeremy Corbyn. When it wasn't popular, Jeremy Corbyn was supporting Palestine. When it is popular, he's supporting Palestine. And going into the next election, people are increasingly, you see the sentiment already, they don't want to hear the same platitudes. They just want to vote for an ideologue that we know will do what they say they're going to do, even if the wind turns.
Yeah, and I think like, even just to kind of bring it back to first principles, let's suppose I'm just a political voter, right? I'm not a rational voter, I'm an irrational voter, right? That's the actual kind of political theory that we need to be talking about. So all I'm seeing is the fact that my bills are going up, can't put food on the table, and also I just see all of these politicians, like you say, talking the big game, but they're actually not backing up their chat at all, right? And so for me then, as an individual who's voting, I'm looking for explanations as to why my material conditions are worsening. And so the people who win are the people who are able to actually articulate that in an effective, charismatic way. And yeah, and that brings me on to my final point. We need those leaders. We need those leaders on the left.
And remember me saying when your party was first announced, it's like, this is the wrong way to go about it. People want answers, and they want to see that you've got some ideology behind you, even down to the name being, it can be whatever it can be. 100%. No, you're the politician. You're the smart political strategist and curator. Tell me the solution, and I'll let you know if you've got my support.
And that's the thing. It comes across as lazy, right? Yeah. It literally comes across as lazy. You're trying to tell the populace, all right, to say, actually, you give me the ideas. Give me all the ideas.
And there should be obviously some level of democracy, but, you know, is this going to be a totally amorphous, malleable creature where there could be loads of entryism from a bunch of far-right people and now Jeremy Corbyn's leader of... It's like, it wasn't clear. The ideology wasn't set in stone, and understandably, people are slightly confused. So, yeah, we obviously are incredibly hopeful about what Jeremy Corbyn, Zara and your party could do. And I'm sure they'll understand if they're watching. It'd be insane if they're watching. Hop on the pod. If they're watching, they'll understand why we're a bit concerned with what we've seen thus far. But you have our support and you have our hopes and prayers. Also,
just shout out Jeremy Corbyn, man. What a guy.
One time for the one time.
Yeah, you know, it's just granddad of the streets. Like, love to see it.
Literally, yeah. I don't think there might not be a bigger hood celeb than Jeremy Corbyn in Finsbury Park.
No, of course. And I think like people need to remember and give him some grace and mercy as well. And I also think that if people actually want to get more information around this kind of particular topic and the kind of trauma that the left has faced, I actually want to shout out on Al Jazeera, the Labour Files.
The Labour Files.
Tasneem Akunji, the guy we worked with, was actually one of the lawyers who helped release it. And so that in and of itself was never covered by the mainstream, but it is fascinating to actually understand the inner workings of the Labour Party.
And speaking of the inner workings of the Labour Party, our third topic gives a bit of a characterisation of what's going on in the Labour Party of the past few years, and the character at the top of it all, Sir, they're giving out knighthoods like chicken change at this point, Sir Keir Starmer. So a book was released on Friday by an investigative journalist called Paul Holden, called The Fraud. And through Labour Inside internal documents and Labour insiders leaking, Paul Holden's been able to develop sort of a 550-odd page book accounting some of the most fraudulent, cronyistic and sort of pathetic behaviour you can imagine from the top brass of the Labour Party, which now is the top brass of the British government. So some of the things that he's seen: Morgan McSweeney, who is the Chief of Staff to Keir Starmer and former director of the think tank Labour Together, is now under scrutiny for having not disclosed around £700,000 worth of electoral donations. Myself and Sean have worked on elections. There isn't much money in British elections. And by goodness, there should not be that much money undiscounted.
700,000?
700,000. You could buy a good League Two footballer for that kind of money.
How many Nando's meals can you get with 700,000?
How many El Cafs could you get for that? Alongside that, there's also been clear documentation of the bullying, corruption, and sort of strategic co-option of the Labour Party by this Labour Together faction, setting up backroom tactics and really sort of... the word I'm looking for is scare tactics, as well as blackmail to oust the leadership in the Corbyn years, to then allow for this entryism from the Labour Together think tank members.
So look, I haven't been following this story that closely, but let me ask you a question, right? Who is the mentor, or like the sort of godfather, so to speak, of Morgan McSweeney?
Who would you say?
Have a guess.
Who?
Peter
Mendelssohn.
Peter Mandelson.
Look at that snap. There we
Peter Mandelson.
But you'd expect that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I know. Can you imagine that?
Birds of a feather.
Flock together.
Precisely. And I think, you know, I haven't finished the book. I've only just started it, but I've looked at some of the interviews that Peter Holden's given, and it is worth a read for anyone, because there's things that we know about and we've heard from insiders ourselves before, but the state of play and the lack of, again, ideology in the top brass of politics in the UK is just on show for everyone to see. These people, they view it as a career, and not a career in the sense of a good, honest day's work, a career in the sense of a game to be played. We see this in the actions of David Lammy. We see this in the actions of and let me not even just stick to the Labour politicians. Osborne, the coalition years. You see this from a lot of the political actors going on. Boris Johnson. There's a stepping stone to a plush job after with the political interests they catered to. Rishi Sunak recently just landed himself a job at one of the top technology companies.
Do you know who I always parade as the top figure for this type of behaviour? Old school name.
Nick Clegg.
Oh, Nick Clegg is one of them.
He's done it already.
Chuka Amuna.
Where's he at now?
Do you remember? I think he's at just some sort of like top financial firm.
My God. And he didn't have that great a career in politics.
Yeah, I know.
Fair enough.
But you know, one thing I do want to mention, and that's for viewers on the pod, because obviously, look, we've been blessed to actually have like a privileged education. And so we've studied the theories on all this kind of theoretical politics. A good theory to look up is Katzenmeier's party cartelization thesis, which actually talks about how structural reasons are why also politicians are incentivized to adopt their careers as just that, careers, right? It's not actually about having ideology or an idealistic vision to change the world, but rather because politicians on both sides have the same incentives, there's a lot of, it turns into some sort of like collusion game to keep outsiders out.
No, precisely. And strangely enough, I'm going to pull a deep one here.
Okay.
Dominic Cummings, in his sort of like fundamental thesis called An Odyssean Education, which again, like I say, as much as we might be two guys from NZA, we're also nerds. I happen to have read Dominic Cummings' thesis.
Speak for yourself.
He talks about like the plague of similarity in the education and ideologies of the top of British politics. And this is why he entered politics, because he said, like, listen, we've got people at the top of our political spectrum totally with the same uniform way of thinking. And he thought a bit about it like a lack of genetic diversity. If a population has a lack of genetic diversity, then one single disease can come along and wipe out the population. Similarly, if there's no intellectual diversity within the political leadership, then one problem can come across and stump all of them. And that's what we're seeing today, where we have these problems which people from the outside are shouting in, of wealth inequality, of the ailments of globalization, of the failures of neoliberalism. And because everyone in the top major parties right now is totally beholden and well baptized within that school of thought, they're just looking around saying, should we penny pinch off the small, medium-sized enterprise? Should we penny pinch off the middle class? Should we penny pinch off of it? Because they just haven't got the intellectual capacity to look beyond that. So again, two different theories for you guys to look up, but we'll wrap up the state of play there. And we're going to get into a bit of a meatier Backroads section. We didn't actually do the Backroads last week. This is a new section.
Should we give it a little applause?
Yeah,
new section,
guys. Look at that, week by week. Look at that expansion. As a startup, venture capital should be looking at us thinking, wow.
Tariq, you need to earn your free paycheck and do a proper little transition for the Backroads. Yeah.
So what the Backroads is the part of the show where we're going to start highlighting some interesting news stories that you might not have seen. We'd expect that some of the stuff we've spoken about in the state of play people have seen before, but on the Backroads it will be some really important, serious stuff, but maybe also some weird and wonderful stuff. Let's get into the Backroads. So as I say, and there's maybe again a bit of London terminology for those of us listening around the country and around the world. In London, you got the main road where the main stuff goes on. You take off the mains, go to the back roads. So these are some topics that me and Sean have sourced, I think maybe be of interest. And the first one is quite a concerning one. There was a Panorama. Panorama is a investigative news BBC show that we have in the UK that has done an undercover documentary on the Metropolitan Police, which is the London Police Service. And they've really uncovered the levels of depravity and institutional misogyny, racism, xenophobia, any ism and schism you want to say, that pervades this particular police service. There was instances, and I can't even recount all of them, but there was instances where police were making light of rape, police were overusing excessive force, police were admitting to turning off their cameras so they could do God knows what when the cameras go off, discussing immigrants as scum, talking about people that we should put a bullet in their head, talking about people that might have committed certain crimes, we should cut off their penises and these sorts of things. And, the Met Police has a pretty tarnished history. And I have members of my family who are police officers who behind the scenes sort of confirmed to me, yes, this is all true and worse. And I think it's honestly incredibly worrying, incredibly concerning, but also just something that is, at this point, quite unsurprising.
Yeah, I really wonder what it is about the psychology of being a police person, or, if it's a self-selective issue of the types of people who become police officers that actually engenders this behavior. It's incredibly shocking because quite clearly we have not progressed from the times of like Stephen Lawrence, right? Where there's so many documentaries about that online where the police literally even spied on the family after the fact and were tracking down the whole the ins and outs of what the families were doing post the case and things like that. And so just like an open question, what do you think it is about being a police officer that makes them act in this way?
I think there's a couple of things where it's like, I don't think the police hire from the best of us, in the sense of, I think the police oftentimes can be a last resort for people. So you end up having people join the police service who aren't they don't have it as a goal in mind. So they're not even really committed to the service. I think also like built within like the institution is a level of like class violence, maintaining certain interests at the expense of others. There's obviously a psychological aspect that you're talking to there.
I think there's like a thing of human nature as well, where they think they're warranted or they're allowed to get their ugly side out in a way that's sanctioned.
It's a bit Stanford prison experiment sort of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like when given that power, you're going to start using it. Like the power is corrupting in and of itself, even if maybe you're a normal person beforehand.
Yeah, well, power tends to corrupt, but absolute power corrupts absolutely.
There we go.
Famous.
I also think like sort of beneath this, maybe the subtext is, I think in the UK especially, we have a very, very inverse or perverted understanding of what policing does. You see that, crime's on the rise in the UK right now in a lot of, well, not in general necessarily, but in a lot of areas. And people say we need more police. I don't know what people think, like if they were living in an era of like Pink Panther and like Inspector Cluedo and these sorts of things. But police don't solve crimes before they happen. And police actually very rarely solve crimes after they happen. And in fact, like, the increase in crime is not associated with a lack of policing. Increase in crime oftentimes is more strongly correlated with impoverishment, is more strongly correlated with disenfranchisement. And yeah, cool, there's certain people who are maybe built-in criminals and do it for the love of the game. But in fact, when a lot of like sort of material interests are resolved, you will see a change in crime. One of the biggest things that was stolen last year, baby formula.
Yeah, well, I think Carla actually talks about it a lot as well, right? Where how back in the day, Glasgow actually had the highest gang violence rates, but then what the Scottish government did was do a massive investment. We're going to have to fact check it, but massive investment into public health services, and sort of broadening out that kind of welfare state accessibility. And so what you actually saw was the now Glasgow isn't known for being one of the most dangerous places in the country anymore.
And even to sum it up, maybe even better, as Vibes Cartel said, what them call police for? Them can't stop the crime. Ghetto youth want money for spend, and that's why so much man are dead.
Goodbye to our sponsors. We're never going to sponsor us anymore.
Vibes, sponsor us yourself, innit?
First.
I met you in Miami, innit? Like, come on, shout your boy. The next topic I want to talk about is, you know, we say that like we've gone from like the police level of like the on the job Bobby Peelers. We're gonna go all the way to the top, where MI5 has had to get involved with like UK Parliament obstructing investigations. And this has just not been in headline news. I don't know how, like, maybe they just had like a super injunction placed on it because someone's already bought the rights to the movie.
It's too embarrassing.
Honestly, I mean, me, myself, like, as a British person, I'm slightly embarrassed, but I'm also not surprised.
Can I tell you something about MI5? So I first started out my career in the civil service, as you know.
Yeah.
And I was just trying to figure out which kind of career to go into. And obviously the Secret Service is part of like, you know, the civil service. And so I was asking around, oh, maybe I should try and just check this thing out. And everyone just laughed at me. Even the civil servants know it's just a joke. They even told me like, okay, aren't you like, you know, thinking about wanting to become a Muslim? All you're going to do is basically just crack down on Muslims for your entirety of your career. So
but even this one, I'll give the explainer, seems like more of like a matter of national interest that hasn't been taken seriously by the British government. So MI5 had to issue a warning to members of parliament last Monday, where they basically said that they had to give up on a case where they were looking to convict two men suspected of spying and releasing national security information to the state of China, because the British government hadn't allowed for the evidence to be provided that national security was at risk. What that means, like in more simplistic terms, is two guys who were involved in British politics at this point, is the best we know, were being put under investigation by MI5 because there was reasonable plausibility that they were spying for China, releasing state top secret information to the Chinese government. They then approached the British government to say, we need certain evidence to pursue this conviction, to pursue legally this conviction. And the British government said to them, no, we don't think it's of national concern. We don't think it's of a national interest. And they've gone back and forth to the point now where like the case just had to be dropped. Because even though these people are pretty much certainly spying for China, Keir Starmer and the people around his table have decided, no, this is not a matter of national interest. And the implication that a lot of people have taken to it, people commenting on it, is perhaps there's some level of like sort of culpability or compromisation of Keir Starmer. Because why on earth would you obstruct MI5 getting on with their job of stopping national secrets being spread?
No, I mean, listen, all we can do is speculate anyways. But I think one interesting thing I saw in the articles from the kind of director of MI5 talking about why it's so important and talking about how, you know, we need to give this case importance because it will compromise democracy, right? It's threatening our democracy. Mate, the calls coming from inside the house. I think there's so many other things that we actually need to be worrying about and cracking down on in this country that our politicians are allowing on the streets, which is undermining our democracy. For example, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago when the far right were marching, do you know who Tommy Robinson had on the big screen? Elon Musk.
Oh, yeah.
The richest man in the world, literally telling people, if you don't fight now, they'll come and fight and you will die. And of course, that doesn't have anything to do necessarily with MI5, but I'm just saying, like, we need to actually get our priorities in check in this country. And
I mean, like, I'm sure a lot of people at home have the same feeling that me and Sean do. It's like, we're looking at the country thinking, why is nothing work? Like, why is everything just getting worse? And like, why are like everything just getting more inefficient? And a big part of it, like the underlying theme that tracks along course with this, is like the reduction in the public space because everything's falling into private hands. The ultra rich are buying up purchasing power. They're buying up assets. They're buying up institutions, and to a certain level, like industry within the UK, such that naturally inefficiency is going to happen because not enough money is floating around the public sector.
It's almost as if it's like people who go into private equity real estate are ruining our country. So what was unrelated question? What was your first job?
Job I left because I realized I've been inside those towers. I've seen what's really going on. I'll come down to tell you, they're onto you. That's the real enemy. It's not people that look like Sean. You know what I mean? Some good news on the back roads.
Okay.
This week, the Green Party, which we've spoken about before on the podcast, if you want to see where we spoke about that, we only have one episode before this, so it should be quite easy to find. They passed over 100,000 members. So
big up to them, you know.
Big up.
Fair enough.
You know, while your party's floundering and trying to get their act together, the Green Party are making serious headway. But did you know the leader of the Green Party, Zack Polanski, that's not even his real name.
Really?
Well, in fact, it is his real name, but he's been under pressure from a lot of tabloid media recently because what's been discovered is this, and I think it's an incredible story. family come from Eastern Europe in the early 1900s to settle in the UK, fleeing a lot of the anti-Semitism that was going on in Europe at that time, pogroms in Russia and anti-Semitic racism and violence in Eastern Europe. So they come to settle in the UK. Fearing further anti-Semitism and further violence in the UK, they decided to change their name to Paulden, which is a lot more British sounding. Then in the early 80s, I don't want to age Zack too much here, David Paulden is born, a young boy who's born in Salford in Manchester and incredibly politically conscious from an early age. At the age of 18, he makes the very, very impressive decision to change his name to the original familial name, Polanski, clearly Jewish, marking him out as a Jewish man, something he wanted to be proud of, and then changing his first name to a fictional character, Zack, also a Jewish character, who he wanted to embody. And even though there's been levied by a lot of tabloid media or something to criticize him as if he's faking, I think that's an incredible story of like pride.
Wait, so the tabloid media are actually criticizing him for that?
They're trying to make something out of it as if he's hiding, but it's literally the opposite. In no way is he hiding. He's showing himself to who he really is, a proud Jewish man. And I just think that's an inspirational story for us all this week.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, obviously, at the top of our bookshelf right here is Malcolm X's biography, who obviously went down a very similar path.
And at this point, we might have also put out our first essay, subscribe to our Substack, Northstar Politics, where I've written about what's in a name, what can be used in a name, where we document, the links will be in the bio, where we document the nominative movements of El Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, or Malcolm X as he might be better known, and Zack Polanski himself, or David Paulden as he was formerly known. A beautiful story. Really, really poignant stuff we've discussed so far. Sean's brought something to talk about.
I do.
Just to lower the tone a little bit.
No, so Noah, you mentioned you like running. So that's correct. You like running.
Love running.
Yeah, and do you like screaming?
Actually, my sister sat behind the camera who grew up with me. I'm not the most emotional in that sense. So yeah, not the biggest screamer.
Right. So the new trend in London town is not running clubs, right? It's screaming clubs.
Days of Kiyama.
Screaming clubs. People are linking up together to go to the park at night, perhaps, and just scream. Actually, it's not even at night. 3 p.m. at Hyde Park, I think, is going to happen this week on Saturday. So,
we rolling? Are we rolling?
I might be a bit busy that day. You can roll.
I might have to step to the Scream Club. Scream Club and then Speaker's Corner after.
100%.
Full Nightmare Blunt Rotation Circuit.
It's where we belong, to be honest.
There we go.
And I just find it such an interesting story because kind of like what you were saying about how much of the public space is sort of being co-opted by private hands. I think both of them are linked. I think the political contexts are quite similar. So how should we begin this narrative? Okay, cool. So you have austerity, right? 2010s. That means government's retreating from having its role in civil society. It's not spending on public services, community organizations, or third spaces, or anything like that, right? Then you have COVID, right? We're locked away for 2 years. And then on top of that, you're coming out of COVID and the economic situation's dire. We're still struggling to overcome the inflationary effects and all these sorts of things. And then now you're in a political context where people are impoverished and they don't have places to go, and we're social animals and we're all yearning for community. So what's a very cheap and easy thing to do to actually gain community? Well, you link up together and you go running, right? And then now I feel like in a very sort of, I guess, poetic way, a screaming club is just a natural kind of logical consequence.
Primal.
Primal.
I like your logic. I like the narrative there.
Yeah.
And honestly, like, welcome to Northstar Politics, where we're going to get theoretical about scream clubs. But I might take it a bit further.
Go on then.
Well, I think within the fundamentals of capitalism, as Marx would have it, as a lot of socialist theorists would have it, is this abstraction from the products of your labor. As we, within the mold of Adam Smith and industrialization, separate ourselves up into different desks and different roles within the production chain, you become abstracted or removed from the actual product of your labor. We're no longer crafting artisanal mugs from start to finish. We're now just adding buttons to shirts. And within the modern information economy, we're even further abstracted where, let it be known, you talk to some of our friends, they'll happily admit, I don't even know what I do. I do what I do, and the company makes money, and I get paid, and I'm happy with that. And it's quite abnormal within human history. Like, there is very much a little speck at the end of human history where people have no contact with the physical realm in terms of producing something. And I think as we get into like sort of maybe the 2000s, you have this like economy of abstraction from productivity. But then, as what I would describe this era as financial totalitarianism, where everything becomes financialized, what then happens is the ability to function within a public space, producing things, then becomes limited because as rents start to rise and wages start to stagnate, there then becomes a lack of financial rationale for pursuing extracurricular activities.
Precisely.
People no longer attend sports clubs or attend music festivals because 1, they become too expensive. 2, they need to work themselves to the bone. 3, rent's too much. So then now we get to a place where people, not only within their work, have no access to reality or a connection with reality, also outside of work, there really is no outside apart from just interaction with social media in this techno-feudal ballpark we're living in.
Exactly. I think it's not even... People like to talk about capitalism or late-stage capitalism, but it's actually more of like we're reverting back to a feudal society. Where
I mean, this is Yanis Varoufakis' big theory, which
exactly.
I'm sure we'll dive into 100%. One day when Yanis comes and sits here. Get on the pod, Yanis.
Right here.
Yanis, I actually came to see you at one of the Navarra events a couple of years ago, and I just thought, this guy, he needs... no hate to Navarra, but he needs to sit with the Northstar boys. But no, yeah, I think it's weird, wonderful, but naturally there is some interesting underpinnings.
And I think our next video is that we will be attending the Screen Club. I'm joking. We're not
Honestly, Scream Club guys, hold tight, you boys.
It's mainly girls, you know.
Is it mainly girls?
Yeah, it's not even guys going.
Mainly girls, yeah. Understandable. We won't be there, but keep doing your thing. We'll keep doing ours, and let the two not mingle. So that was the Backroads, where hopefully you've been illuminated some weird and wonderful topics that have been going on this week. We're now going to get into my favorite part of the show, based on the one experience we've had. Let me land. Last week, you saw me victoriously land my hot take against Sean floundering.
You see how fake news happens in real time? Misinformation just out on the airwaves.
Cementing that norm, just trying to build that norm. But this week, Sean has got a hot take that he's pre-prepared. So let's get into it. Sean, what is the hot take?
Right. So I know I'm going to get absolutely flamed for this, but let me land, right? I don't think that left-wing parties in their public messaging should call themselves socialist and actually use that political terminology.
Interesting. Build that out for me, please.
Okay, cool. So what is socialism, right? It's the social ownership of the means of production. So what does that actually mean tangibly? Well, it means that obviously you're passing policies that actually are geared towards the community, right? So you're investing in things like the welfare state, public education, controlling rents on housing, and so forth. And so what we're seeing, and I think there's an interesting dichotomy in messaging that I've seen from the Green Party and your party, is the following. On the one hand, your party is talking about galvanizing a socialist movement, right? Where I suppose the calculus is that because they're so open about the fact that they want to bring socialism to this country, even though, you know, it's defined differently by a lot of people, that they want to get support in that way. However, the Green Party now, they're not actually saying on the public or political messaging, or I haven't seen it being said, that they're explicitly socialist. Rather, what they're talking about is actually just being able to control bills, put food on the table, that type of stuff. And I think it's not a problem being a socialist. That's definitely not what I'm saying.
Tower Hamlets.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, I can hear it. BMW likelihood.
In a social authoritarian country, this wouldn't be happening.
Yeah, we need the social ownership of his whip.
What was I saying? So yeah. It's not a problem being a socialist. That's definitely not what I mean, right? We both align ourselves with a lot of socialist principles. It's just that to what extent is this actually cutting through to the electorate? I think it's a bit of a hindrance.
Okay. I understand where you're coming from, but are you losing sight of the Northstar?
Go ahead.
Should we be making those sort of semantic concessions rather than just staying firm and true to our course? If we are socialists and we think that socialism should be something that's normalized within public discourse and be the predominant way of doing politics, should we not stay clear to that? Should we not be explicit? And is it not a bit duplicitous to try and Trojan horse our ideals in under different guises?
No, so I don't think it's the case that what I'm arguing for is to say that we're not socialist, right? So you can be very honest about the fact that you are socialist. So if a politician or leader sits down and they get questions, are you a socialist? Then you say, yes, of course. But one of the big problems, and something that we referred to earlier in the podcast, is this idea of the irrational voter. What do voters actually care about? Voters don't care about, or most voters don't care about political theory or these kind of theoretical concepts or ideas. They want to understand how things are going to better their life. And so actually, even taken from the Zoran Mandani method, albeit it's a mayoral election, so it's a bit different, the big posters wasn't let's bring socialism here. It was, let's lower bills, make rent affordable. And I think that's the more effective messaging, which I think the likes of Zara Sultana, not to, explicitly criticize her, but she's missing that.
Okay. So I get what you're saying then, is that we should do socialism by all means, but understand that part of politics is communication. It's not just strategy.
Precisely.
Okay. I think I'm broadly in agreement with what you're saying. I do think that there's a little bit of different political and cultural context between the US and the UK.
Okay.
In the US, Red Scare, Reaganomics, all these things, like, you cannot get away with saying I'm socialist. McCarthy, they'll literally just say, you're a communist, like, off you pop. Whereas in the UK, I do think the UK should be a bit more proud of its socialist heritage, of like the NHS, of things like this, of like the weekend, of all these sorts of trade union achievements. So I think in the UK, there isn't that same like negative connotation with socialism. I think for a lot of people, it is something they want to hear loud and clear. But I do think that's a really interesting point you bring up. And I guess like the thing that we can build consensus on there is that parties and political leaders should be a bit more aware of how they're perceived. And I guess what we're trying to bring to light is that your policies are good for a lot of you politicians out there, but you're not packaging them well because you're kind of out of tune with people's impression of them. And you're trying to force onto people this homo politicus, if I could offer a portmanteau, where people are totally rational political agents, when in fact, it's kind of the secondary job for the politician is not only to come up with the policies, but also package them in a way that I like.
Yeah, precisely.
As the electorate.
And I think that is actually one of the principal problems of the quote-unquote left. And because it can cement into a bad branding issue, right? So even the idea that, to kind of move away a bit, this idea of the Green Party, people still in their minds have an idea of them as just basically tree huggers. And
like the connotations with socialism, maybe in the UK, with like the Corbyn propaganda against him, is that socialism kind of means poor governability. Like they're not really governable.
Exactly, and it seems a bit unserious and silly. And even though a lot of us understand that and know that, I think those of us who do understand and know that should actually not be applying pressure as well for them to co-opt themselves under the kind of socialist label explicitly.
I kind of like that. I get what you're saying. Me personally, I kind of think he landed that. But as always, like everyone in the comments, let us know if you think he landed it. Let us know your opinions as well, because that's a bit more of a nuanced one. That's not really cut and dry. So please do, don't DM us personally, because that is cyberbullying. But definitely get in the comments below. #engagement. We're now going to get on to probably another part of the show that I've really enjoyed, Echo Chamber, where one of us is going to bring an idea that's been rattling around our heads, the Echo Chamber itself, and cast it to the light.
Can I cut in here?
Yeah.
So me and Noah had a big debate over WhatsApp, right? What does echo chamber actually mean? So, let's not define it for them. Right. You put in the comments what you think echo chamber actually connotates, right? Yeah. And then next week we're going to review it, because I think I'm right.
And just remember what I said at the start. You'll know you're wrong if you disagree with me. So try and be right in the comments. But let's get into the echo chamber. Welcome to the Echo Chamber. This week, we're going to be in Noah's Echo Chamber, and I've got something to present, borrowing from one of my favourite political thinkers, and probably yours as well. And it's based on an essay I wrote on my Substack, Noah East 9, tap in, coming from the Martinician psychiatrist, Frantz Fanon, who a lot of us will be familiar with. Frantz Fanon, born in Martinique, the island actually across from my family, Dominica, who went on to become a psychiatrist during the Algerian Civil War, and looked at the philosophy and the political underpinnings of decolonialism. And his book, The Wretched of the Earth, really, really famous book. And it's one that I think a lot of us on the left have like what I'd call a contextual understanding of. We all kind of know what he means, and we kind of get it. So we kind of even wonder to ourselves, is there anything more to be garnered from reading it? And I actually sat down around this time last year, read it, ended up reading it a second time, and so much to be gleaned from reading it. So please do so. But there was a part of it which came to mind when I returned to London this summer. In the opening chapters of The Pitfalls of National Consciousness, Fanon looks to highlight those members of the native population who might undermine the independence movement once it's been gained. So what do we mean by that? So for Fanon, he looks at when the colonial rulers have been pushed out by the native population, there will be those members of the middle class who look to undermine the achievements of nationalisation, of independence, by profiteering. They will look to replicate the previous bourgeois colonial class in their own image. They will be the black faces on that system. For them, nationalisation isn't the restoration or the implementation of national industry, putting the industry at service of the population. To them, and I'll quote Fanon here, nationalisation quite simply means the transfer into the native hands of those unfair advantages which are a legacy of the colonial period. He's incredibly critical of these kind of people, this faux bourgeois, who look to embody a lot of the traits of the colonial middle class, but have none of the economic underpinning. They didn't develop anything, they didn't innovate anything, they literally are intermediaries. And what they do quite materially is they carry on cementing that colonial pipeline just within a new framework. Neocolonialism. They carry on being the business owners who help export raw materials from the previously colonized country to the metropolis, rather than allowing the country to push towards self-sufficiency or nationally centered economics. That in and of itself is an incredibly powerful idea. And of course, it relates most pertinently to a decolonial environment. But what I was thinking is that when we look at class mobile people within the West, which is what we're most acquainted with, and especially like ethnic minorities, but also working class people who have achieved some level of like class mobility, maybe gone on to great universities and then got into like really high corporate jobs. I think some of these same sort of faults are present. These people, whether because of they were born into like sort of an ethnic minority background or a working class background, probably were raised with an understanding that they are pushing for some level of liberation from whatever oppression they suffer from. But along the road, they have been sort of rewarded financially, materially, by their taking part in the same system which they at one point sought to scupper. And I look at some of our peers who have left Oxford University or some other great universities and gone into the glass towers of whatever location you want to say, this side of the Atlantic or in New York. And they are following the same playbook of undermining the movement for liberation. And even though that might sound like a haughty term to use, that is what we're talking about, the movement for liberation of their class, of their people, such that if they really had that self-reflection, within this battle between the oppressed and the oppressors, they might end up facing their own family on the battlefield in what they do, in the actual material implications of what they do.
No, I think that's, first of all, very, very fascinating. Very eloquent as well, mashallah. May I say so myself?
Trying to.
Look, I think one of the big problems with this mentality is this fundamental assumptions around, is my outlook rooted in the individual or the community? And so, look, even if we just kind of bring it back to very like first principles that people can understand very easily. Listen, you're growing up in ends. It's hard, man. You're seeing your mum struggle. You're seeing people go to prison. You're seeing people do a lot of nonsense growing up.
Probably ain't even seeing your dad for some of us.
Well, for both of us. But anyways, that's another topic. And you get blessed with this privilege to go to Oxford University. And then, as we said earlier, who is knocking on your door constantly, 24/7? There's all these opportunities that are tempting you to basically come and serve their kind of institution, even though it undermines those kind of principles of community building and like grassroots organizing that you might sort of believe in. And I think...
And even more materially, it literally might be part of the system that just puts your mum's rent up.
Yeah, no, of course, right? Because you've had these experiences growing up where you can't, or maybe you haven't seen mum put the food on the table, and now you can be in a position to put food on the table. But then I think I'm just interested in understanding, like, from the individual's perspective, how do you battle that self-interest?
I think it takes discipline, man. And honestly, obviously we both know that it's incredibly hard. Like, it is so alluring, material desires of this system. But I think the thing to think about is, if you're one of these people out there who recognizes that the system within which you were born is racist, is classist, is exploitative, is sexist, yet the majority of your day is spent being successful within that system, you're going to have to be quite honest with yourself that you are culpable for promoting all of those things. And we talk a lot about structural injustice, me and yourself, and it'll become a theme of this topic. That's how you become aware of the structural injustice you're a part of. You are trying to be the king of this structure, therefore you're really promoting it.
And I think that change, though, like real change, it doesn't happen top down, but it happens bottom up from everyone's micro decisions to do just a bit of good in the world. And so I would encourage people to just really sit and think about, what is it that I can do to kind of unroot some injustice in my capacity, right? So perhaps if you are a big corporate lawyer, well, maybe you give some pro bono work to a charity. If you're like us and you talk or trying to make a career of talking, then talk about the issues that matter.
And I mean, also, the discipline as well is like, do I need this much money?
Yeah.
Do I actually need more and more? And I think we talk all the time about when money's on the table, there's an allure to try and lie to yourself that, oh, I'll do this for 10 years and then I'll come out and I'll make the change I want. But we say a lot, the practice is the person. You know, you see sometimes Muslim scholars a lot will talk about, sometimes people don't feel worthy to pray when their iman, when their faith is low. But that's the point that you need to find yourself on the mat in sujood, because it is the practice of praying that will increase your iman.
But who is the Muslim here? Me or Noah? Gosh, mashallah.
I'm just a Tao Hamlet's man.
No.
In that same sense, though, the practice of doing these, engaging this exploitative behavior, being part of a structure which is counterproductive to your original goals, will end up you coming out the other side a different person.
But even I think it's about this accountability matrix, right? So I know that every act that I do, because I'm a practicing Muslim, will one day be accountable to God. And so it's very difficult for me to actually... Gosh, there's so much crime down here.
I know.
I wish people would actually feel like they're accountable to God, because maybe then we wouldn't hear so many sirens.
I mean, speak about the Panorama documentary. Who knows where they're going right now, those police.
But I think like having a spiritual background as well and a spiritual outlook, which is something that's very lost in this world, doesn't necessarily lead to this conclusion, but it can be sufficient for it, is to be able to actually get you to those conclusions that allow you to stay true and stay firm on those principles that you might be raised with.
And it's also just like reinforcing the idea that I'm glad I was raised with, that money is not the only metric.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a very religious thing. Like people that were raised religiously will understand this, but money really isn't the only metric. And a lot of times, you know, the society we live in might judge you a lot by money because we're living in an age of like I say, financial totalitarianism. But for your own self, don't only value yourself by the money you earn, which will allow you to pursue other more ideological goals. I think we'll leave it there for the echo chamber. And I hope I've been able to get those ideas out a bit more. As I say, we'll be putting out a couple essays on Northstar, so head to the Northstar Politics Substack. Also head to my personal Substack, Noah East 9. There's loads of stuff on there.
I write too, by the way. Shout
out. yours as well. Yeah, Sean got into writing as well.
Sean Ramey's
Substack.
Everything. But everything's going to be in the link anyways.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a lot more thought out than the words. These are just off the dome. The words you write are a lot more thought out, so we hope you'll enjoy. There we go. Another episode.
Another sort of step to greatness, hopefully.
Greatness, wow. Lofty ambitions. But honest...
What's our name?
Northstar.
There we go, man.
All eyes on the Northstar.
There you go.
No, honestly, like, I think I just want to reiterate how grateful both myself and Sean are for the support that we've seen over this past week. It has been honestly incredible. Like, people reaching out to me who just, you know, people I knew from school, university, told people I don't even know, messaging me privately. For me, I'm sometimes quite a pessimistic person, but just seeing that like outpouring of like support and love, I can't thank you guys enough. No. And every little bit helps. Like, you guys are the early people here. We literally read all your comments. Please keep commenting, share, like, all of that kind of good stuff, because I don't think you understand how much it helps.
Yeah, no, I just kind of want to echo those sentiments, of course, because, you know, for a long time I've been creating and my followers were pushing me to do something like this. And so, I mean, I hope I'm doing right by my old followers and the new followers that we're having together. And also I think, like, not to get mushy and emotional, but I wouldn't want to be doing this with anyone else other than my brother, my best friend right here.
Come on, man. And likewise. And like, as we've said before, and we'll say time and time again, like, the Northstar community we're trying to build, we'll be trying to push to do in-person stuff as soon as possible. Yeah. We're trying to connect with people as much as we can online. We're trying to build something quite special and expand into loads of different areas. At the same time, because it is a two-way street, tell us what you want to see.
Please.
Tell us what you want to be involved in. Like, this is not just meant to be me and Sean sat here at a table, drinking coffee, chatting. This is meant to be a much broader thing involving multifaceted endeavors with multifaceted people.
And look, I have the background, or we have the background of doing videos in real life, going outside, talking to people. So if you want us to investigate something, if you think there's something that's coming up, tell us about it and we'll be there.
Speaking of things to know, in this part of the section, we like to just sign off with like, put the people onto something. No, sure. What things should the people know about? What should they be looking out for?
Look, so myself and Noah, we've been recipients of charity all our lives, and we want to make sure that this show, wherever it may go, even if it reaches the Northstar, is always going to be grounded in the community. And so I want to shout out some charities and community organizations that I think people should know about. So one follower reached out and said, please can you shout out the work that Solidarity Sports are doing, which is a young charity based in West London that puts on sporting activities for vulnerable young people. I also want to shout out a community organization that my friend is running. It's called the Fajr Club.
Oh, so top club. I've been seeing that all over socials.
Well, listen, at this rate, you're probably going to turn up to one. And what they do is it's all for the love of the game. They don't even have sponsors yet, but they're getting young Muslims together for the Fajr prayer in the mosque, etc. And, you know, having a nice little lecture and food. So shout out to them. Shout out to Anas as well.
Yeah, nice. We'll leave links for that in the description. For me, the things that I think I want to put on people's radar is I went to a great event last week after filming. One of my dear friends, Ezra Ola, follow him on social media, brilliant writer, brilliant multifaceted creator. He recently left the job in like corporate, like in finance, to pursue something more.
Probably because you're in his ear talking about France Fanon.
To pursue something more fulfilling.
Yeah.
And he put on a poetry night called Burning Questions, where he talked about the burning questions that the corporate life had left him with. And it was absolutely brilliant. So I'm sure the poem's up on his socials, so go and check that out. The other thing is I read a beautiful little passage from one of my increasingly favorite authors, a Sudanese author called Tayyib Saleh. A short story called A Handful of Dates, which encompasses a lot of the topics we talk about a lot more succinctly and beautifully than we could. So go and find that short story. It's literally a couple pages. So that's the things we should be on your radar.
And one last thing is that this Saturday, if you see this now, we will be at My Life, My Say, talking to young people about engendering a better sort of understanding of politics.
Precisely. So we're going to wrap up there. Thank you so much for watching. Again, thank you so much for all the support. We'll be back again next week. And keep supporting, keep liking, keep following. Thank you very much.